As we do every week, it's time to speak to the best-selling author of The War on the West, The Strange Death of Europe and the Madness of Crowds, Douglas Murray. Let's start in the UK, the state of policing in the UK, the extremist rhetoric from some UK-based Islamic preachers, and the state of the media. ITV decided to give a platform to this woman who, in the wake of the terrorist attacks in Israel that left 1,400 dead and more than 200 taken hostage, well, she was on ITV complaining about Islamophobia in the UK. This is Latifa Abushakra, and this is what she had to say after the October 7 attack.
Nothing will ever be able to take back this moment of triumph, this moment of resistance, this moment of surprise, this moment of humiliation on behalf of the Zionist entity. Nothing, ever.
Douglas, the glee, the joy there, it's psychotic.
Yes, it's psychotically evil. It's evil on an unimaginable magnitude that anyone could react to the deliberate slaughter of civilians of any kind, anywhere in the world like that. If this was to be anybody else who'd said that about the murder of any other minority or any other nationality, they would be nowhere near civilized society. In fact, they'd be ostracized, probably chased out. But this woman was actually invited by ITV onto one of those main channels, and she talked about how tough it is to be Muslim in Britain. She had a very different demeanor that day, I can tell you, Rita. It wasn't the gleeful, grinning maniac psychotic. She put on a meek, humble and worried look as she talked about how difficult it is to be a Muslim in Britain. Now, as I say, we are being played. We are being played in countries like ours. We have a certain type of psychopath like this who gets away with, on the one hand, praising the murder of Jews wherever they can, and on the other hand, playing the, oh, I'm such a victim and it's so terrible living in a Western free society because you're so mean about Muslims. On the other, we're being played, and we need to be a lot wiser to that fact.
Now to the police, and we have seen the constabulary have some very tolerant approaches when it comes to what constitutes hate speech in the UK. We've had Islamists chant for jihad and freeing Palestine from the river to the sea. We know what that means, but there was no such tolerance for Isabel Warren Spruce, who was standing near an abortion clinic. Now, she was not harassing anybody going in. She was not chanting anything. She was not protesting. She was simply praying silently when the cops showed up. Let's have a look.
Are you here to pray for the lives of unborn children?
It's a little bit leading, but no, I'm not.
Okay. Can your actions be carried out elsewhere?
I can pray elsewhere, but I want to pray here today.
Douglas, thank God she didn't accidentally, I don't know, misgender someone, or she could be spending life in jail. What is going on in the UK?
You know, this Christian campaigner was standing in the vicinity of an abortion clinic, and she was questioned by police because she was praying in her head. This has happened before with her. And she was asked by that, the clip we didn't see, the officer says to her, are you a member of a pro-life organization? Well, a few days earlier, thousands of Muslims from the UK, predominantly Muslims, some non-Muslims as well, walked through the center of London and other cities in favor of a pro-death organization. And the police didn't harass or stop them. In fact, when bearded Muslim men stood outside one of the embassies in London last Saturday and called for jihad and for the Muslim armies to arise, the Metropolitan Police didn't seem to find it an issue of any concern. They stood around rather helpfully. Subsequently, the crack Quran interpretation squad at the Metropolitan Police issued a statement saying word jihad has multiple different meanings. No, it doesn't. Not when it's a big bearded maniac screaming for jihad on the streets of London. That isn't a man calling for an inner personal spiritual struggle with the nature of the deity. No, it's somebody calling for violence against the infidel. But the Met's not interested in that. And it's fascinating, by the way. It's just fascinating the priorities here. We have had in Britain our national monuments desecrated by the presence of these pro-death organizations. The cenotaph, the memorial to the dead of World War I and World War II in Britain and the Commonwealth, had the stage set up beside it for these maniac Jew haters to have their rallies. Well, okay, fine. We have sacred places, and that's one of them. That's one of them. And yet the Metropolitan Police allows the Islamists to defile this week after week. And they go for this poor Christian campaigner praying silently in her head. As I say, she should have said, no, I'm not praying silently in my head for unborn children. I'm just going to scream, jihad, jihad, slay the infidel. And the officer would have said, oh, well, go on your way, madam. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Now to the US, and there again seems to be a preoccupation with Islamophobia, even as Jews are being targeted at university campuses and in major cities across the US. Here is White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre being asked about anti-Semitism, but instead she talks about Islamophobia.
Muslim and those perceived to be Muslim have endured a disproportionate number of hate-fueled attacks. And certainly President Biden understands that many of our Muslim, Arab Americans and Palestinian American loved ones and neighbors are worried about the hate being directed at their communities. And that is something you heard the president speak to in his address.
Douglas, today I saw footage of Jewish students trapped in a library, not able to leave because there were protesters outside and they feared for their safety. And yet the White House, again, preoccupied with Islamophobia.
Yeah, I saw that same footage, Rita. I also read an account of one of the students these were just Jewish students who had to be locked in a room for their own safety as crowds outside chanted pro-Palestinian slogans. Can you imagine any other community where this would be acceptable? Apparently, by the way, the Jewish students were offered various ways out by some of the college people there, including the possibility they could hide in the attic. You sometimes wonder if anybody has any knowledge of history anymore. Anyway, yes, this is always the norm. It goes back to where we started, Rita. Always the playbook is Jews are murdered by Muslim fanatics. Large majorities of Muslim communities in the West fail to condemn said fanatics. Certain proportions seem to go along with them. Muslims promptly call victim on themselves, and the Jews are blamed. That's the way around. You know, I will guarantee in the days and weeks ahead, there will be no protests of Jews in the West massively targeting Muslim students, for instance, simply for being Muslim. There will not be a campaign of vile harassment on innocent Muslims who happen to be going about their business by large crowds of Jews. But that is the case with Muslims against Jews. And yet it is the Muslims who are still seen as the victims in this situation. And as for the White House, I mean, they just can't decouple these things. They can't just say, look, actually, the statistics such as we have show that anti-Jewish hate crime has massively peaked in all of our countries in the last fortnight, in the last 2 weeks. There has been no massive rise in Islamophobia. But, by the way, if they do want to talk about these two things, they could mention the fact that if there's any such thing as Islamophobia, it comes about because of the behavior of radical Muslims. And if the rest of the Muslims in the world want to do something about so-called Islamophobia, they could do something about the radical Muslims. That's what I'd like to hear about from them.
Now, moving along to publications that were once respected. Scientific American is one such publication. It was once widely trusted and expected to live up to its name. But sadly, Douglas, we've seen even science and medicine corrupted by far-left ideology. In a new piece by two academics, we had this lunacy published, and I'll quote here: "The inequity between male and female athletes is a result not of inherent biological differences between the sexes, but of biases in how they are treated in sports." Douglas, it's frightening when even the field of science is abandoning evidence-based theories in favour of ideology.
It is. It's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, how can anybody claim that with a straight face? But they do, and they claim it with a straight academic face. This is one of the ways we can tell in our era with 100% certainty if we are being lied to, and if a publication is worth reading or not. Once this woke mind virus has infected an organization, infected a publication, infected the brain of an individual, we know that they are effectively lost. They can be helped back sometimes from this extreme mental defect, but not always. And I suppose it's our decision one by one whether we just write people like Scientific American off, or at some point allow them to try to go and dry themselves out from this disastrous form of thinking. I'd like to see them dry themselves out. Sadly, too many people have drunk too deep from this well.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure as always.